Hello, welcome to the second screencast for Chapter 14. This one is going to cover sections 2 and 3. Section 2 is about community interactions, and section 3 is about population density and distribution. You should have your INB open up to page 15 and be ready to take notes. And these sections are covering learning targets 3, 4, 5, and 6. Alright, so we're going to talk about the community interactions first. Organisms can interact as individuals from one organism to another, and an entire population can interact with other populations, other species. So we'll just talk about both of those types. And there's three main types of interactions that we're going to talk about. Competition is the first one. Predation is the second one, and then symbiotic relationships. And when we talk about symbiotic relationships, there's three specific ones that we're going to talk about. So really, we're going to be doing an activity in class, and you're going to choose between 5 different possibilities, the 3 types of symbiotic ones, and then either competition or predation. So we'll talk about competition first, then predation, then get into the symbiotic relationships. So competition is pretty straightforward. It's when two organisms are going to fight for the same limited resources. It could be food, it could be water, it could be the right to mate with a female. And there's 2 types of competition: interspecific competition and intraspecific. Words look very similar. There's just that one little difference at the end of the inter and intra. I always remember same is SA, in intra has the A in it. So intra-specific, we'll cover that first over here with the zebra. Intra-specific is competition between members of the same population. So here's this A, and here's this A. Okay, so here are 2 zebra. It could be 2 males in this case fighting for the right to mate with one of the females. And then we also have interspecific competition. This is competition between 2 different species. So this picture over here shows, your flower bed or your potting plant and those different species. It could be a type of grass, it could be some plants, different weeds. They're all fighting for soil, the nutrients in the soil, fertilizers, water, things like that. So those are different species trying to gain an advantage and have more space in that area. So just remember, intra is competition between members of the same species, same population. Inter is between different. Predation is the process by which one organism is going to capture and feed upon another organism. So the whole intent of the process is that one animal is trying to kill the other one for food. So it's not competition. In competition, it's possible that one of the individuals involved might die, but that's not the whole goal of the competition. In predation, the whole goal is to kill and feed upon the other organism. All right, and then we get to the symbiotic relationships, or symbiosis. Symbiosis is defined as a close ecological relationship between 2 or more organisms of different species that live in direct contact with one another. And there's 3 major types: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. And we're all familiar with types of symbiosis. We know that flowers provide the bees with nectar. When the bee buzzes around and gets its food, it's delivering pollen from the different plants for pollination. We don't call that like, oh, that's a symbiotic relationship. In that case, it's mutualism. Both of the organisms are benefiting. We'll get to that in just a second. But we do know of a lot of these different things. So the activity in class that we're going to do, you're going to read about different types of interactions, and you're going to be able to classify them as either one of these types, so mutualism, commensalism, or parasitism, or, as we just talked about, either competition or predation. All right, the first type is mutualism. Mutualism means that both of the organisms or species are going to benefit from the relationship of interaction between each other. So your book gives the example of the lesser long-nosed bat and the saguaro cactus. I talked about the bees and the flowers. Those are all different types of mutualistic relationships. The key here is that both of the organisms are involved are going to get some sort of benefit from the interaction with the other species. All right, next relationship is commensalism. This is a relationship between two organisms. One of them is going to receive a benefit, and the other one just is kind of there. It doesn't benefit, it's not harmed. There's several examples of this. Two of them are on the slide. So we have these epiphytes and trees. So this type of moss root is on the bark. It has better access to light and water, but it doesn't really harm the tree. The tree is just there. It's home to this, but definitely the moss roots are better off because they're higher up and have better access to light. Over here we have the shark and the remora. The shark is going to provide protection to the remora. The shark isn't benefited in any way. It's not harmed in any way. It's just kind of there. There's one that's talked about in your book, which is kind of interesting. Our eyelashes are home to these tiny little mites, which feed on oil secretions and dead skin. You probably didn't know that they were even there. They are there. They're not hurting us, but they are definitely benefiting because they have a home there. That's where they're receiving their nutrients, and that is their habitat. So that is commensalism. One benefits, the other one isn't harmed, but it really doesn't benefit either. All right, and then the last symbiotic relationship is parasitism, or I'm sure you've heard of parasites. So this is a relationship in which one of the organisms is going to benefit, the parasite, while the other one is harmed. And usually that one is referred to as the host. This is similar to predation, but the parasite benefits from keeping the host alive. So the goal isn't to kill the other organism right away. It's feeding off of it. Tapeworms would be an example. There's a bunch of different examples of these. So in your book, it talks about this red hornworm and the braconid wasp. The wasps are going to lay eggs in the hornworm. The larvae feed off the caterpillar's innards and hatch out through their surface. So we will do an activity in class where you guys will be, again, reading different interactions, and you will need to classify them as either parasitism, commensalism, mutualism, competition, or predation. All right, now we're moving to section 3 of chapter 14 on population density and distribution. So the first part just talks about how do we define population density. So it's the number of individuals that live in a defined area. So we can use this simple equation, the number of individuals divided by the area, to get the population density. The example that they give it in the book is a scientist sampling a population of deer that is like 200 individuals in an area of 10 square kilometers. You do the math, and that gives you a deer population density of 20 deer per square kilometer. So ecologists look at population density and how it changes to make determinations on the habitat in the area, what's changing, if the habitat is still viable, if they're able to find resources. And if you see major shifts in population densities, it could tell you a lot about the habitat and whether or not individuals are able to be successful in that area. Now that we know how we determine population density, we need to also look at how individuals in that area disperse themselves or spread themselves out in that area. And there's three main dispersion patterns. There's clumped dispersion, uniform dispersion, and random dispersion. So we'll go through each of these. The first type is clumped dispersion. So individuals that are going to live close together in groups. A lot of times you see schools of fish, flocks of birds, herds of animals. The reason why animals would go to this dispersion pattern, it is going to help facilitate mating. So you have males and females available. Big thing is gaining protection. So there's kind of strength in numbers. And then access to food resources. So they're all hunting together, finding food, finding resources together. Next we have uniform dispersion. This is when individuals are going to live specific distances from one another. Reasons animals would do this would be competition for limited resources. A lot of times we see this with birds or very territorial species. They're going to each have their own little nesting area, and that's their space, and no one's going to invade that, and everyone knows that that is their space. So a lot of times we see a lot of interest-specific competition, and remember that is competition between members of the same species. So that is uniform dispersion. And the last type of dispersion pattern that we see is random. So individuals are spread randomly within an area or volume. A lot of times we see this with plants and trees, anything that has wind-blown seeds. It's just kind of wherever they land, that's where they're going to grow. An animal species that is an example of this would be the three-toed sloth. They're a solitary animal. They spend most of their life in the canopy of tropical forests. They don't have a lot of competitors. They have few predators as well. So there's no real reason for them to herd together, band together, be together. So they just kind of have their solitary existence, and they are very happy in the canopy of tropical forests. The last page of this section, or the last part of this section, talks about survivorship curves. So to define what a survivorship curve is, it's just a diagram showing the number of surviving members over time from a measured set of births. So what this can give us information about is the life history of a species. So basically, do they do a lot of care for their young? Do they have high infant mortality? Are they having lots of offspring? And really, when we look at the different life strategies of different organisms, they kind of fit into three distinct curves, I guess. If we look at this graph, so this is the percentage of maximum lifespan, so how many of the individuals make it to 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, and then this is the number of survivors, okay? So if we look at our type 1, this is the orange line here, this top one. And this would be characteristic of large mammals, including humans. So we have usually not a lot of offspring born, but those that are born are highly cared for in their early years, so we don't see a lot of them dying early. And then a lot of them make it to middle age, and then once they reach an older age, that's when we see more deaths. Okay, so that would be a type 1. A type 2 curve is this green one right here. Okay, and what's you're going to see there is birds, small mammals. Kind of you have a survivorship rate that is roughly equal at all ages of the organism's life. So at any time, species are going to have equal chances of living and dying, whether it's predation, disease, all kinds of different things. And then type 3 is characteristic of organisms that are going to have a large number of offspring. at a time, like hundreds or thousands, but then they're not going to invest in care of those organisms. And so a lot of them are going to die early. Only a few of them are going to make it to an older age and pass on those genes and traits to the next generation. Kind of the idea there is that you have a lot of offspring and you cross your fingers and hope that some of them are going to make it. And yes, some of them do make it, but it's at the expense of a lot of them dying early on. So invertebrates, fish, amphibians, plants, things like that are going to have that type 3 survivorship curve. All right, that does it for chapter 14, section 2 and 3. There will be one more screencast for chapter 14 covering sections 4 and 5, which you will watch tomorrow night.